Hello, Internet. My name is John Kulas. I'm a 20-year professor of industrial and organizational psychology, 10-year user of R for traditional R statistical purposes, and for the last 7 or 8 years, I've also been using R to author things like presentations and technical reports and academic papers. And so every week I get together with some collaborators and we just hang out, make ourselves available if there's anyone else out there who wants to ask questions about how to get started or how to continue or how to skill up and level up with using R as an authoring platform, primarily through Quarto and R Markdown. And so, I forgot I disabled a function off of this week's slides, and the slide link is available in the comments or in the chat. I'm not sure the proper term for that, but they're available there. Um, but I disabled the mouse wheel navigation option on the slide deck this week, so it kind of took me by surprise. But every week, what we do is ideally, what we'd like to do is we'd like to help other people who are interested in this and maybe just want to know where to get started or how to go about doing something. So we want to be a resource for people. Um, and we've been kind of having fun, or I guess I've been having fun, and I've been learning a lot just going over and focusing on a single feature each week. And so last week, what we looked at were how to incorporate emojis and icons into your document. This week, what we're going to cover is a little more traditional, I think, for how most people think of R. Now, I've been mentioning this for a while, but um, when I now in- introduce students to R, I don't frame it as the new statistical platform. I know you students, you might have been exposed to this platform in your past, whether that be Excel, some people use, or SPSS, or SAS, or whatever it might be, tends to differ by disciplinary tradition a little bit. But rather than saying that this is the new replacement for that, I've been trying to frame it as, well, this is a single source platform where you can execute an entire project from beginning to end, including the analytical components. However, tonight we're going to be revisiting some of the more statisticky kind of looking aspects of R. We're going to look at how to annotate your script and your code if you want to share with somebody, and uh, maybe make that sharing a little, I guess transparent isn't the word, but a little friendlier in terms of explanations of what you did or highlighting certain aspects of your script that you think are important to share. So before we get into that, we'll recap what happened last week with emojis and icons. That's always fun because I get to see uh, Bullwinkle when we do that. So here's our transitional Bullwinkle.
Well, on their way to Mount Flatten, where Bullwinkle's uncle had left him a mine, our heroes have run into a serious water shortage. But when Boris disguised himself as Gunga Drain, an Indian water peddler, Rocky turned him down.
Yeah, it isn't as if we're dying of thirst.
Course we are.
It was then that Boris offered them 2 free souvenirs that he said were chameleons.
I don't believe it. These animals have claws.
That's because they're desert chameleons. They use the claws to walk through sand.
I still don't believe it.
You don't believe in sandy claws?
That's
What a good dad pun. Bullwinkle's good for some dad jokes, I think. I appreciate them anyway. So last week, in this slide, if you navigate to it, it has a bunch of hidden hyperlinks on it. So um, emojis in the title will take you to Hadley Wickham's emo package, which is the one that we used for the emojis. And the icons hyperlink in the title will take, well, if we just go on it, it'll take you to the Font Awesome R package website that explains how to access it and how to use it. I also, we didn't talk about it last week, but you can also hyperlink off of the icons and emojis. And so The GitHub outline here. This is a font awesome icon, and we made that a hyperlink, and we did the same thing to an emoji just to demonstrate that you can also hyperlink off of these emojis and icons. I don't remember what. Oh yeah, just a picture of Mr. Peanut. I don't know why I saw the monocled emoji and it made me think of Mr. Peanut. Maybe because when I was struggling with kind of a frog in my throat, we'd just been talking about idioms in a tests and measures class, so I hesitate to say frog in my throat. But so when I had a little bit of a scratchy throat and was coughing and having a hard time speaking, I think I diagnosed the reason for it, and it was because I was tossing back a few peanuts before I went into a session like this. And the older you get, the more toxic peanuts become. Like that, I remember my grandmother when she was getting older. That was like an extremely adventurous, I guess, adventure to double use an adjective. But so she didn't handle peanuts well, or maybe it's just our family. So anyway, I'm staying away from him, other than Mr. Peanut here, who's, I don't know, great advertising icon. We should all appreciate what he's done for the peanut industry. Him and Jimmy Carter are the two I think that have helped the most. So, so you can hyperlink off of those emojis and icons, and then there's more information for the packages we used if you follow those hyperlinks. I've used some of our code annotation and code highlighting features that we've been, if you've been watching these, you've seen these before as well. Anytime I share code, most of the time the code is shared, we actually utilize some of these features. But what we have here is a stripped down QMD. You can always copy these. You should be able to copy this and paste it straight into a fresh Quarto document as long as you have Quarto loaded on your machine. We wrote a little bit of CSS here. If you do that, you're going to have to uh, take a look at line 6 and 12. I took back a tick, so you need 3 ticks on those, not 2. Um, and actually, that's one. So we probably won't get to it this week, but it's one feature that we should probably cover is how to more effectively share entire scripts from projects as opposed to sharing script um, from a .r type script file. And so I've been using little tricks to try to share entire QMD and RMD documents, the R Markdown and the Quarto document types. But there are some issues, and as a matter of fact, GitHub is a good place for me to look because they have kind of some of the similar issues with the Markdown language that they use to work the platforms and forums on their site. And so maybe I'll take a look at that. Anyway, other than line 6 and 12, you should be able to copy this code, paste it into a QMD, run it, and if you do run it, you get an output like you see here. The echo on the CSS chunk comes through just like an echo would come through on an R chunk. Now, we didn't put any chunk specifications in here, just by default it's going to echo. And so that's what you actually see here in the HTML file, in the rendered HTML file. We, as per usual, didn't really have a lot of planning going into this. We just kind of started pulling icons and emojis that we thought were neat. We pulled an airplane one. If we look at the script itself, it's here on line 15. And we have 2 different sizes in the rendered document. I don't know how easy that is to see, but these are technically 2 different sized airplanes. And that's following this first level header with 1 hash mark versus a second level header with 2 hash marks. Because we started, so for some reason, I don't remember why, but we started dealing with koalas. So we put a picture of a koala in there and had a different way to control the size of the emoji itself. In this particular case, these are emojis. And so that's where the CSS comes into play. We wrote a little a bit of customized CSS such that all we were focused on is font size. Now, in emoji, I'm not sure if that's coming in and considered in the same classification as type, TYPE type. I guess it's the same. What is it? It's a homophone. If it's the same spelling, it just means different things in different contexts. But the EM specification I've been using more and more when I'm trying to control the appearance of things that I'm rendering in an HTML format. And so the EM, we should look up what that means. I've been calling it enlarge magnification because that's what it does. Uh, but I'm sure that's not what the EM actually stands for. So let's correct ourselves here and see if we can figure it out. It's going to be a relative length. It doesn't say what it means, but it's relative to the font size of the size. Yeah, so this is, now I'm really curious. Let's ask Grok. Let's do that. I've been using a little bit of AI. And my students, Diego in particular, he would give a shocked look right now. And I'm not a great prompt writer yet, so I'm going to keep an eye on the comments if anyone has any ideas of what else to say. EM comes from typography, width of the capital M in a given typeface. So it might actually be specific to the letter M. So it might be phonetic EM. Interesting. Or this could all be made up too. Um, I guess I'm going to keep referring to it as magnification because that's the effect that it actually has. So we blew this up quite a bit. So 5EM is going to be 5 times the size of a non-altered bit of code, bit of text, I'm sorry. And so I don't know how easy it is to see this, but this koala that looks like a gray parrot when it's huge, it doesn't look so much koala-like, but we wrapped that in a bit of what in Quarto parlance is referred to as a bracketed span. And so those square brackets and then the curly brackets after the square brackets indicating what styling you want to apply. And the bigger is a specification that we came up with. You could have called that whatever you want to call it, but we called it bigger. And so that's how we affected the size change on the emoji in the HTML document. We also did fenced divs. So to affect the change and apply the styling that you want, if it's just a little tiny thing that you want to affect, you can use these bracketed spans. That's the way that I've typically been applying styling. But if it's a larger chunk of information, you can enclose what you want to affect within a fenced div. And so the fenced divs uses these, in Quarto uses these at least 3 colon specifications. And I've talked about it over the weeks that I'm not the hugest fan of this styling convention or specification because when you start to nest things, it gets really messy. So nesting means if I were to enclose the bigger specifications within, let's say, columns or tab sets or other sorts of stylings that are also indicated by fenced divs, then it gets really difficult to identify your opening and closing fences. The one of the great things about the IDEs that we use, and so again, I'm a very big I'm a very big R Studio fan, and so the feedback that you get with, for example, curly brackets and parentheses in the editor is fantastic because you'll get a second highlight. Uh, you'll get a second highlight of whatever parenthesis, either opening or ending, that you're on. And so that's great feedback. We don't have that same level of feedback with the fences. And so the fences, here's an example of a nested fence that I used for this week's slide specification. So if we look in my preview window here, we'll look for the code annotation section. You can see that I specified columns. You can also see a bracketed span that I used here for the font specification of the title. But these fenced div, these nested fence divs get really messy in terms of the larger code, in terms of what goes where. And so you can start to see that when, if you look at the larger scripting. So, but that's not why you're here. You're not here about fenced divs and nested fence divs. You're here to see about emojis and icons. And so the expectation is that this bigger, which is 5 times normal, would apply equally to 3 different font awesome icons. So the font awesome specification is FA that we used. The emo package specifications JI that we used. And these both work equally well in HTML files. Well, these both work really well in HTML outputs, whether it's an HTML document or something like a reveal presentation like what you're looking at here. And so if we look at the output, you see those 3 icons, and it was a clapperboard and a route specification, and then the company Apple. And the only real tweaking that we did with the icons was we changed the color, the fill color of them. And these are hexadecimal codes, and I just use a hexadecimal picker online. If you literally Google hexadecimal picker or hex, even just hex color picker, you'll find all kinds of options. Adobe has a really nice page. I haven't used it for a while, but it's helpful for palettes if you want more than one color. We didn't really care about consistency, so we just pulled kind of random colors that we thought would be interesting. And then the other thing that I hadn't played with before, but we played with last week, was this fill underscore opacity option. And our expectation was that we might not see an effect unless we had a different than white background, but you do. So that opacity was working for us, even though we just were rendering on top of a normal white background. So the opacity really worked fine. And so this is that, and that's an index that goes from, well, 0, I guess, but 0 would just be, it's invisible. If you wanted for some reason to put, and actually I can think of reasons. If you wanted to simulate something like an invisible ink effect, or if you wanted to hide the answer to a question from a student group or a training group, I imagine setting the opacity to 0 might be an option there. So you could then, and I don't know if I'm going to be able to do it here, the way that I've hosted this particular output, I'm not able to highlight it. But if this were a normal, I guess I can. I can't seem to do the images. I'm stopping at Mr. Koala. But if you were to set the opacity to 0 and then if you could highlight it, the expectation would be that it becomes visible. So that maybe that's an application where you could go to 0 on opacity. But it operates the same way as Alpha does in ggplot. I think that's, to a lot of people who use R, that's probably the area where you're gonna, that's a tweak that is familiar to a lot of us in terms of data representations. So fill opacity, that was kind of fun to play with. And then we mostly replicated this with a PDF file. If we just take a quick look at the PDF output, you'll see that the planes look the same. The fonts are coming through a little different just by default. And I haven't played with Typist yet, or Typist, the kind of newer PDF generator. but this is just LaTeX or standard Quarto PDF document. The rendering looks almost the same, except for the default font. Like I said, in the text itself, the icons themselves look the same. Even the opacity works the same. So uh, the scripting for that doesn't require any sort of alteration for the font awesome elements. It does, however, require differentiation for the emojis, and so the emo package doesn't work just by itself with a PDF rendered document, and so the CSS also is a styling that is unique to HTML, the HTML language. So the CSS is not going to do anything to information that's rendered in a PDF format. So if you want to change how something looks in a PDF document, first of all, you can maybe check out Typist, which I haven't checked out yet. But traditionally, the way to do it would be to introduce some LaTeX specifications. And so the huge specification is an option by default with these LaTeX engines. And so it's going to have a similar effect to our .vigor specification when we use CSS, with the one caveat being that huge uppercase H, huge lowercase h, and a bunch of other modifiers are kind of built in within the LaTeX typesetting system, and so it's not going to be 5 times. It's just it's the biggest that's built into the system. And the way that LaTeX works is, I say LaTeX, but the way that LaTeX works is it's going to affect everything after this statement until you undo that statement. So if we look at the output, these two font awesome icons are being rendered at the same size as this koala that comes after the huge. Now the way that we did get the emojis in is we actually took a function that was written by someone at, looks like, Washington U, and so there's a hyperlink here. If you're interested, you can follow it. But we actually, since we weren't able to use the emo package with the PDF file, and we wanted to see if we could get some, not just icons but also emojis into a PDF document, we went and found and stole that code, and so that code helped. The other thing that we did was, and some of this is unique to my machine and some of it might be necessary, but one that does seem important is the PDF engine that you use. And so the Lua LaTeX is not the only option. There's a bunch of them that come built into. I think this is off of Quarto. I'm almost certain this is off of Quarto. But the default, which I think is Zalatex, I'm not 100% certain on that. But the way in which we generate the PDF from the Markdown and from the LaTeX uh, might matter, and so it does matter in the context of using these emojis. And so we were able to actually get the emojis by using a different PDF generator. We also played around with an existing package. Now, the existing package is separate, should be separate from this function that was actually created, but we didn't fully tease that apart. And so I left that information in my YAML header. Wow, that's a lot of professorial rambling for what we did last week. What we would like to do, and I guess I'm saying the royal we again, but what I would like to do this week is to go over some of the options with annotating your code. And so the context in which you would want to use this is like what we're doing right now. You're trying to explain, or you're trying to help explain and be a little more transparent and clear with what you did or why you actually did it. And I think we'll probably just cover at least two of these tonight. So if on this slide, if I kind of go forward and backward on this slide a little bit, and you can see the lower status bar on my slide deck here as I go two up and two back, it's showing you that internally it looks like I'm progressing the slides, and I'm doing that by using the arrow keys because I've disabled the mouse wheel scroll. But you're seeing line 1 highlighted, lines 1 and 3 highlighted, and lines 1, 3, and 5 highlighted with a little bleed through for the rest of it. So the rest of it does get a little get a little highlight in it as well. And I think again, I'm thinking that's more bug-ish than feature-ish because it wasn't doing that for me with earlier installations of Quarto. And I've actually backed up one version of Quarto because there is an issue with the newest edition of Quarto. There's a couple of them that I'm not sure if they're truly bugs or not, but there's one that I've verified that is a bug and it's not going to be remedied until the next version of Quarto. And actually, it is a feature that I want for my class presentations. So I've backed up and I'm currently on not the most recent version of Quarto, but one prior to the most recent version of Quarto. And so I'm I'm wondering if once we get, I don't know if this is something that the Quarto developers care about, and it might have some interaction with my machine or the way that I have these slides styled, but there is a little bleed through in terms of the advancement of the highlighting. And so we'll play with that. The advancement itself in terms of the animations that you're seeing as I advance the slides, I think that's a feature that's only on slides. So I don't really see a use for that in a standalone HTML document that's not a slide presentation deck. Maybe there is, but on the top of my head, I'm not thinking of one. And certainly those PDF documents, those are static documents, so we're not going to have interactive elements on them. So I believe the code highlighting advancement that we're seeing is something that's going to be specific to these Reveal.js presentations. The other thing that we're going to take a look at is these code annotations, and this is the annotation specifically, is the ability to identify little bits of code and then add some extra explanation to what that code is doing, or if you just, in this case, I just added some emojis, and since we were talking about emojis, and the annotations themselves, the reason I did that is to show that the annotations will also reflect emojis. It picks them up in there as well. The whole emoji thing, when I first started using it, I overused it. It's like that metaphor when you're holding a hammer, everything looks like a nail. I think that kind of happened to me with emojis and fonts. They're still fun to use, and I still like to put them in presentations, but I think I'm probably the person who appreciates them the most, which is odd. I don't know. As the author of these things, you kind of hope that other people appreciate it more, but I think it's probably more me. Okay. Well, what did I change in here? I don't remember changing anything in here, but let's go ahead and we'll start with a presentation. We'll do a presentation with code annotations. We will do a HTML file. Let's start with an HTML file because we can do some more interactive things with the slides. So let's see what just a standard HTML file looks like. I think well, yeah, we got to stay with Quarto. This is a Quarto feature. There is a way to do this in Markdown as well, but the but it the level of support and the level of functionality that we see in Quarto is something that I think I'm interested in focusing on. So we'll do a Quarto document. So you need Quarto to be installed separately. We'll go ahead and leave it untitled. I'm going to ask for an HTML document first, and we can see if we can retain some of these elements of interactivity that we see nicely um, in the slide deck. I'm going to render this, and I'm going to, again, I feel kind of bad about this, but I should have named this something else. I have so many test and temp files that the last few weeks I've just been using the Casey file. So Casey's one of the collaborators that occasionally pops by. And so for whatever reason, we called this the Casey file at one point, or I did, I guess. So here's a empty Quarto HTML template file. And there is a bit of code in here already. So we can go ahead and add a comment. So the code annotations, the format for them is a little embellishment to the standard comment line. So the comment is just a hash mark, the pound symbol. But if you follow the pound symbol with a number with angled brackets around it, then that number you can call out immediately after your code chunk and say, hey, look at this. Isn't this neat? And we can add our emoji if we want to add an emoji. So we'll do an inline our emo double colon JI, open and close parentheses, double quotes, and then we'll look for an emoji. Well, you know what? Let's just put in a keyword and see what it pulls up. So face, we saw last week, was a keyword, not a specific emoji. And let's re-render this. Okay, so you're seeing the annotation show up. It's actually showing up formatted a little differently. So this is what the format looks like by default in a PDF document. I should be able to hide that as well. So let's go ahead and look at Quarto annotation. And we'll see if we can alter that a little bit. We should be able to do that both within the YAML if we want to do it for all annotations, and we should be able to do it, we should be able to override that and just do it kind of one by one if we want to as well. Below, hover and select. So hover is the one that I've been using. So let's see if we can include that in our YAML. Now when we're doing these, typically when we're doing these sorts of tweaks, we've been hard returning the output type, put a colon after it, and then further indenting on the tweak. Now I'm not sure if this is a first level YAML command or not. The code itself on the help page wasn't all that helpful. So, or it didn't, I'm sure it was very helpful, but it didn't specify. So we might get an error here. If we get an error, we'll just change the specification of that code annotations. It looks like that was good. So this should operate like my slides have been operating, where you're not going to get the annotation itself until you hover over the little rightmost number here. And it's the same, it's going to be the same information. It looks different here because I had a silly specification for my emoji. This just says grab a face. I'm not specifying which face. Let's grab a different one so we can have some better consistency here. So I don't know, beaming with smiling eyes. That's grinning with sweat, kind of like that one. So let's see if we can replace it and get some consistency. So there's grinning with sweat in my hover. And the thing about these YAML specifications is you can do the standard comment out in them. And that's, I, I don't know why, but I really like that, as going back and forth between document to document to document and salvaging code from one project to another. So yeah, it's the same. And then there's actually a third option on there, which I don't think I've used. Let's take a look at what that third option is. Select. Oh, okay. So select is probably a little nicer than hover. I, I think I should change what I have by default. Because hover requires you to keep your cursor over that little target of the circle with a 1. So as soon as I move it away, it goes away. Select should stay there regardless of where my cursor is. I think I like that better. We'll see. Yeah. So select means go ahead and just like a radial button, you click it and then do whatever else you want to do. Should be able to go to quarto and come back. And that's probably better. So I think let me do it now. In my YAML specification, I'm going to change that to select because I like that a lot better. I didn't even know that was an option. Sweet. I'm learning. I don't know if anyone else is out there learning, but I'm actually learning, so I appreciate that. So those are the 3 that we have. I guess one other thing that we can do is do more code. And again, this is silly code, obviously. And I'm curious to see what the output will look like, because is that just going to be a sequence of, yeah, it'll just be a sequence of operations, I guess. So on line number 1, I can have 1. If you want to extend that, you can actually, and you don't need all these indents. I just by practice, I guess, I've been giving myself some space between the bit of code on the left and kind of a nice identifiable column with the code annotation. So what this is going to do, well, let me get rid of that first. Let me render it just with this larger, deeper chunk here. So now I have more space. I kept the select on. The highlighting that you see is what I'm paying attention to here. So the highlighting in this particular case, and we can change the background of the code chunk if we want in terms of the output, but just the default kind of shadow gray, when I select it, you see subtly the gray is a little deeper, and that's indicating the bit of code that we're referencing here with our note. Now you can actually, if we wanted to repeat this, we can go 1 on line 17, 1 on line 18. Let's re-render that. And then there's a shortcut. And so we'll take a look at this, and then we'll take a look at the shortcut as well. So every line now, 1 through 3, has that kind of nice, subtle, but easy to identify, like what is this note referring to, bit highlighted. Now you don't need to specify every line. You can specify a start and a finish. So if we wanted to do the first 3 here, I'm leaving a big space in between the comments. And so even though I'm leaving a space, everything between, and this is probably overwritable as well. So we'll see, maybe it's not the default. Everything in between is included, and so that's a nice little That's a nice little feature, I think. And then if you want to add additional, you can. You don't need to go sequentially either, I don't believe. But if we call this 3, and we'd have to get a little fancier in terms of looking under the hood if you wanted to use a different notation scheme other than numbers. If you wanted to use symbols, if you wanted to use letters, I think uh, we'd have to play with it a little bit. But so if I have a one, oh, I have a 1 and a 3. Well, let's try it with 2 and see what happens. Does this come through? And it might. It actually might, even though after the code chunk I'm calling it a number different from what I have as an annotation. Yeah, it doesn't like that. Okay, so let's change it to 3. See if that comes through. It did get a little bit of feedback here too. List item 2. Okay. So I was just trying that to see if we could do something that is different from the normal way that normal people would do it. So as long as you're okay, I guess, with consecutive numbers, you can do that. We can use the same strategy here, and lines 23 through 24 are now going to be highlighted instead of just the 4 plus 4. So now we'll get 4 plus 4 and 8 plus 6. And of course, you wouldn't normally use this the way we're using it. You would say maybe something like, "Look, this is subtraction." Hey, look at this. It's addition. And so that would obviously be a lot more relevant to the content that we're identifying here, and that's kind of what you want to use annotations for. Again, this select specification and hover specification should only be available in HTML documents. So it's not going to be something that is an option for us if we render a PDF. Before we do the PDF, let's do one more thing, because another feature that Quarto makes possible is to do code line numbers. And I wonder if it's going to let me do this. So code line numbers in the reveal documents is without annotation highlighting. And it looks like that's something that is probably specific to Reveal.js again. Okay, so if we wanted to play with that a little more in the standard HTML file, we could. Let's go ahead and, or we would have to, we'd have to dig a little bit deeper on that. If we go ahead and render this as a set of slides, and go to our code chunk, it doesn't by default now in the HTML document. By default, it's showing our code. By default, in the Reveal.js, it's not. So I'm using a hash pipe here, and we'll say echo true. And actually, I'm gonna it's fun. Well, we'll just render that and take a look. We might have to get rid of some of the text because we might have overflowing content. No, it looks like it's okay. So here we get the select works the same. The graying out looks a little different, you'll notice. So now it's not grayed out, it's simply a box that's in there. But the actual content that's being conveyed is the same. The code line numbers, I'm not getting what I thought I was going to get. So let's try a few of them. And my specification might be a little bit off. The thing about these Reveal.js presentations, and there we go. The thing about the Reveal.js presentations is the code chunks, the echoed code specifications are coming through by default a little different. So one of the things I'm noticing, I don't do this in standard HTML files. I've just been doing this in Reveal.js documents. So I'm used to seeing, for example, the index number show up on the left there, and that's kind of nice. So the highlighting that you're seeing isn't all that, it's not all that visible with a default slide deck. If we wanted to make it a little more visible, we'd probably need to add a theme. I don't remember if you need quote specifications on themes or not. There we go. So it's still not. The coloration on the code highlighting to me comes through a little more, I guess, but it's still a little subtle. And again, you can get more specific with the way in which those code annotations look. Wow. This one looks quite a bit different, doesn't it? Okay. I'm going to get rid of that theme. We'll just go back to our white one. And I think the last thing that I wanted to do was to take a look at this in a PDF file as well, because we're going to lose the interactivity in the PDF file. And what else? I guess what else did I want to? In these reveal slides, you can do the sequencing by using that vertical pipe operator. So I can say, give me 1 and 3 the first time, and then give me 9 after that. And so I'm looking at the index number here on my rendered document in the preview pane. And so if this works, and again, this is one of those features that's been a little wonky, but it's working fine here. I'm guessing the reason that it might be a little wonky for me is I have so much goop on my slides. I just have too much stuff in there. We've been covering a different feature each week for 67 weeks. And so many of those features I decided to incorporate in my slides. You can see if you don't have the goop, the actual sequencing is quite nice here, and there's no bleeding through. It's just 1 and 3 here and 9 here, and that's just me toggling through with the arrows. And so it's a nice feature of, in addition to the annotations that you have, it's another way of kind of drawing someone's attention to a bit of your code. The other thing you can do, and you already saw this with 1 and 3, but if you just use the comma separator there, they'll be highlighted simultaneously. This, for whatever reason, the through option on this command throws me a little bit. I'm expecting a colon. I don't know why, but the dash is the specification. So if you want all of them, or if you want a sequence of line numbers to be highlighted, you just use the dash. So it's probably going to be easier to see if I go 1 through 7. So 9 will be grayed out here on this. Okay, so let's take a look at a PDF and see what that looks like. And let's just run it as we have it, even though I have, like, this should not work. So code annotation select shouldn't have any effect on our PDF document. The emojis, we're gonna have a problem with the emojis now as well, because we can't use the emo package for those emojis. I might just run into the code for this week's slides and pull that function that we have and see if we can get it to work. But now you'll see the code annotations just are going to come up underneath the code chunk. You still get the nice in a circle number, and that is a visual cue that these annotations refer to these bits of code. Now, one thing that you're not seeing is you're not seeing the full sequence, like where it stops. So you're seeing where the code starts, but not where the code stops. And I believe that's something that we could override if we wanted to look into ways to tweak the formatting of this as well. So there should be a way to specify that if you're interested in actually doing that. But so the code annotations to me are most powerful in the HTML and the HTML and the reveal.js is also an HTML output type. So let me see if I can grab this little bit of code and see if it works for us. I don't think it's going to without extra specification. I'm going to stick it into a hidden chunk here. And then we'll try to change, let's see. Again, I think we're going to at least need that different PDF engine. You can usually get a sense on these PDF renderings if there's going to be an issue by the time it takes. I don't think it's going to like it. So let me, I think it'll still render, but I don't think it's going to give us, the emoji. So we'll get a little more specific. We'll capture the code that we actually used last week and see if that works. Yeah, it didn't like it, and in fact, it didn't like our annotation. What's my level of indentation here? I think I screwed that up. But these indentations, it's really important in the front matter, and it's not a bad error to throw because they're usually fairly descriptive in terms of the error warnings that you get. They're usually pretty easy to find, and your fail will usually happen really quickly too. Hey, look at that, we got an emoji. So yeah, using the kind of workaround that we used last week, you can go ahead and get those emojis in here as well. But again, the actual location of the annotation itself is going to be set. There's just so much more. There's so much more rigidity with PDFs and with LaTeX. The background specification of how to typeset things. There's so much more flexibility with those HTML types. So, and it's just fun to be able to interact with something too. So I don't know. I've really been enjoying the HTML products that I've been working with, including the slides that we're doing for these weekly sessions. So, all right, I think that's it. Thank you for showing up. Thanks for watching. If you come across this and have a request on some feature to cover, drop me a note, and I'd love to take a look at it. Otherwise, I don't know. Stay tuned. I'm not sure what we're going to do next week. All right.